So to the question, Islam and liberal democracy, how tradition matters, my response would be, it depends. Islam and liberal democracy, it depends. The question of tradition, it depends. It depends on what you make of tradition and what you make of human experiences. So the first question is that what do we mean by Islam? What do we mean by Islam, in my understanding, when we talk about Islam, we're talking about a civilizational experience. And we're talking about multiple intellectual traditions, a point that previous speakers have already made, etc. But I do think that there is a problem when we begin to say there is something Islamic politically, or Islamic economics, or Islamic sociology, etc., deeply problematic categories, because I have seen Muslims walk down the street. I've never seen Islam walk down the street. So it's always embodied, is in form of practices, etc. I've never seen Christianity walk down the street. Always seen Christians walk down the street. So I think we are talking in embodied terms, and I think I just want to make sure that we on the same page in this communication here, that we're talking about things in their practice, in their existence, in all their complexity and their messiness. The second point I want to make is the one about tradition. I think there is now an emergence of a whole, post-McIntyre, but also Stanley Hauerwas, Jeff Stout, and a whole range of writings, Said Hussein Nasser, lots of other people, talking about tradition. But oftentimes it seems that when we talk about tradition, we're talking about the past. Now, it seems that tradition, for me, tradition is both a kind, what I would call a construct as well as a covenant. It is about how one deals with questions of, what we call ontological questions, about the reality of being, and how we are bound by certain very deep motivations and dispensations within us, and as human beings, etc., how we are motivated and how we act. It seems that oftentimes we use the word tradition in the sense of authority. That's only one meaning of tradition. Tradition is also about beauty, it's also about binding, it's also about, and I would say the best metaphor we can talk about when we think about tradition is about love. I think the idea that you love something and your relationship with certain practices, certain memories, certain understandings of ultimate reality, etc., is a relationship of love. But I think the reductive understanding of tradition is one of the notion of authority. So, the third point I want to make is the whole question that people, there's a general kind of discussion, I think Professor Jackson touched on it, is the claim that the Quran and Sunnah are normative. Now, how are they normative? I don't understand that. Quran and Sunnah, in my view, are sources, and the normativity is constructed out of it. So this normativity, this force of authority that is given to teachings from the Quran and Sunnah, but also from other sources, other materials, etc., is one that is imbued in those materials through a certain kind of human authority. It's constructed. So while the sources have some kind of revelatory beginning and origins, etc., the understanding is deeply, deeply human, and it is a construction, etc. And therefore, traditions of normativity in Islam are multiple and products of discrete environments. And I want to argue that the framing of the debate in terms of the Quran and Sunnah being normative, and I think this is generally the case, and I think deep anguish goes around it, etc., is inconsistent with what I call the canonical traditions of Muslim thought. In other words, the long-established traditions of normativity, some that are still survived, others that are only now available in the archives, etc., that those traditions do not operate in this way, that treat the Quran and Sunnah as normative. This is, I think, a very kind of modern version, articulation of normativity in Islam, and what I call a dumbed-down version of Salafism. I wouldn't even say that Salafism is of this order, but I would say that a very scripturalist and a dumbed-down version of Salafism operates in this way. I would say that as sources, the Quran, the Sunnah, and all the other constructions, etc., subsequent to it, are fungible and subject to interpretation. Third, the next point I want to make is that the ideal of the liberal democratic state has two central normative claims. The first is to ensure liberty or freedom as an obligation, and also as the predominant feature of governance and morality. The second is that political authority is grounded in the consent of the ruled, rather than an act of divine authorization. In other words, political authority is grounded in a secular authority. Now, I would argue that the question whether Muslim thought is compatible or incommensurable with liberal democracy, I would say that it requires a kind of a historical opening, and I think several of the previous speakers have already alluded to that, and that is that one needs to explore where, Muslim events in Muslim history that show that how politics have been managed and how politics have been practiced, and that Islam's moral code, political institution, and modes of thinking were all products of discrete material conditions. They were not, in a way that many moderns understand, that they were imbued with certain kind of theological obligations. The theological obligation is part of a construction, but is not in any way divine in my view. Islamic political institutions, in my view, are both adaptive and transformative. They are contingent on the experience of Muslim societies. And therefore, whether liberal democracy in Islam and its compatibility or incommensurability, I would say that some of these things are not inevitable. They are contingent on historical experiences, and it's the historical experiences of Muslim communities that will either bring together these two traditions in a new hybrid form, or it will unfold in a way that we have yet to imagine how it occurs. These are my opening remarks. Thank you very much.